Hello everyone, today we are talking about slope. So we're going to talk about the different types of slope and how to find slope from a graph. So the first thing is, what is slope, right? Well, slope is going to be the steepness of a line, and we also call it our rate of change. A good real life example of slope is going to be like the steepness of a hill. So picture yourself skiing or sledding or anything like that. The steeper the hill is, right, it would have a higher slope. So it'd be really fast to go down, where those kind of bunny hills that you would start off on, right, are going to have a lesser slope. So that steepness, right, that's what we're talking about when we say slope. So we're going to be drawing lines, and today we're going to see a lot of lines on graphs, and so that steepness is where the slope comes from. Now, when we're talking about slope, we are always going to refer to this variable m. So I don't know why they chose m, but we have m is going to represent our slope every single time. There's a bunch of different ways to calculate this, a bunch of different ways to represent our slope, but again, it's always going to be our change in y over change in x, and we're going to refer to this as rise over run a lot. It's always going to be written as a fraction to start off with, and we always want to make sure that that fraction is in simplest form. It's okay if it's improper and has a bigger number on top and smaller number on the bottom, but we always want to have the numbers in simplest form whenever we can. So let's talk about the 4 different types of slope. Now, this year we're only going to focus on the first 3, but I did want to throw that 4th type in there as well so you've seen it. So when we are talking about slope on a graph, you always have to read it left to right, just like you would read a page on a book, right? So if I go left to right, on this first one, you can see that I'm going up. So this would be a positive slope because I'm going up from left to right. Now, if I'm going again left to right, this time you can see I'm going down. And so if I go down left to right, that would be a negative slope. Now for our third one, look at that. If we go left to right, we are just going straight across. We're not going up or down at all. So that is why we have a slope of 0. And then again, next year or later on in math, you will talk about an undefined slope, where instead of going directly across left to right, we are going straight up and down. You won't see that on your test, but again, you're going to hear it sometimes, so I want to make sure you've seen them. So how do we figure out? We know that if they're positive, negative, or 0, but where do we get that number for those fractions as we're going? So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to find the slope from a graph. So our first step is to find our 2 perfect points. Let's talk about what I mean by that. So you can see that on this line, right, we have these 3 points that have all been chosen as our perfect points. They were chosen because they go directly through the corners of those little crosshairs of our axes. If I'm looking along that line, you'll see that the other points, right, so if I pick this point here, see how it's kind of cutting in the middle of one of those little squares? Again, I'm cutting right through the middle. I'm not going through one of those perfect little crosshairs. So these 3 points are where it's going directly through those corner points, and so those are called our perfect points. Now, we can choose any 2 points that we want, but you're always going to go from left to right, just like when we were reading slope on the page. So for this first example, right, the second step was to find the rise. So I'm going to choose these 2 points because that's what they have on their notes, right? And so to get from here to here, we want to see how far up did we go. So you can see I went up 1, 2, 3, 4 times, right, to get in line with that second point. So we're kind of making these little triangles. So my rise then is going to be 4. Now, the third step then is to find our run. So our run is how far we're going side to side. So from here, I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times over to get my run. And again, we're always going to write this as a fraction, rise over run. You'll hear that a million times. So when I take that rise over run, we take that 4 over 6. And so that is where the slope comes from. Now again, remember we always want it in simplest form, so we can divide both 4 and 6 by 2 to get us 2/3 as our simplest form. One last trick for you though is that if you always choose the 2 points that are closest together, you won't have to worry about simplifying. So let's say I would have chosen these middle 2 points instead. See how they're closer together? Now if I look at my rise, I'm going up 2, and my run, I'm going over 3. So you can see that that's where that 2/3 comes from. And it doesn't matter where on the line you go. So again, if I would have started here, I go up 2 over 3 to get to that point, up 2 over 3 to get to that point. It kind of looks like little stairs, right? And that is how they put those points on the line, and that is how we represent our function. Okay, so the last thing they're going to ask you to do in this video is to write an equation to represent the function. Our equations are always going to be in the form y equals mx. And remember, we already talked about that m is that variable that represents slope every time. So we said in our slope here, our slope was 2/3. So if I want to write that as an equation, I'm going to write y equals, I'm going to take out that m that represents my slope, right? And I'm going to plug in that 2/3 for my slope. So y equals 2/3 x. This is my equation that represents that line. All right, so now that we've got some background information, let's do some practice. So starting off with these bottom questions, right? How do we identify and define different types of slope from a graph? So we're going to label each one as positive, negative, or zero. So I'm going to walk through the first two with you, and I want you to try the last two on your own. Again, we are going left to right, so it helps even if you put your pencil on the line and draw it up. So from left to right, I am going up, so this would be a positive slope. Now, same thing, I'm going left to right. If I trace that line, do we see I'm going down from left to right? And so this would be a negative slope. Pause the video here and try those last two. All right, let's see how you did. So again, going left to right, this time I'm going up, so that is positive. And this one was a tricky one. Left to right, we are not going up or down, so this is just my zero slope. All right, let's get into the last part of our practice, which is getting the slope from a graph. So for each of these, we are going to find our slope. So again, you can pick any 2 points, but we are always going left to right. I like to start at the origin when I can, right? Just because I feel like that's a good place to go. So I'm going to start by finding my rise, that up and down, and you can see I've gone 1, 2, 3. So that rise for this one is going to be 3. Now, if I find my run, that's how far side to side I go. And in this case, you can see that I only hopped over 1 time, so my rise is 3 and my run is 1. So if I want to write that as a fraction, I'm going to write that as that rise over run, 3 over 1. And so anytime we have 1 on the bottom, most of the time they're going to just write it as a whole number. So instead of saying 3 over 1, we would just write that as 3. Now remember, for my equation, it's always y equals mx, and that m stands for slope. So we said our slope is 3, so this time it'll be y equals 3x. So the equation for this line is y equals 3x, and the slope is 3 over 1. So you can see, any points that I go on, I'm going up 3 over 1, up 3 over 1, up 3 over 1, up 3 over 1. So it does not matter where you start or where you end. All right, let's try the next one together. So again, we are going left to right. So this time you can see that if I'm going from this point to this point, instead of going up to get there, now I have to go down and over. We also can tell if this is a negative slope because I'm going down left to right. So our number for our slope should be negative. So let's look at that rise together. So this time we're going down 1, 2, 3. So instead of a positive 3, I'm going to write that as negative 3. And my run, going side to side, I'm going over 4 to get to that next point. So my run will be 4. So I'm going to write that again, rise over run, negative 3 over 4. There's no simplifying I need to do. So that is going to be our slope. So when I write that as my equation, I get y equals negative 3/4 x. And again, I'm going to show you this one more time. Doesn't matter where we go, we're always going down 3 over 4. Down 3 over 4. So again, you're going to get that same slope anywhere on the line. All right, for these last two practices, they made it a little trickier because they did not give you those perfect points to start. So we're going to have to find those spots on our own. So before we get started, let's look at this. This one is going down from left to right, so I know that my slope should be negative. This one is going up from left to right, so I know my slope should be positive. That's a good check step to kind of put in your head before you ever start putting answers down. Now again, I want to find those perfect points where it's going perfectly through the corner. So you can see on here, this one is going right through a crosshair, and then again, I'm going in a square, in a square, in a square, in a square, and then this one again, perfectly through a corner. Not anything, right? Kind of cutting in the middle of squares until I get down here for those perfect points. So my 3 perfect points that I see are up here, at the origin, and down here. And this just takes some practice to be able to see them. If you're still struggling with that, it is okay. So now we're going to find our rise and our run. Again, to go left to right, I've got to go down for number 3. So I'm going down 5, and I'm going over 2. So my rise is going to be negative 5 this time, and my run is going to be positive 2. So again, rise over run is negative 5 over 2, and I realize that I'm blocking this with my little face. All right, so it's okay that that bigger number is on top. We're not going to simplify it into a mixed number. We just want to make sure that there's nothing we can divide the top and the bottom both by, so this is good to go. So my equation, y equals mx, is going to be y equals negative 5 over 2 x. All right, last one. You can pause it here if you want to try to find those perfect points. Otherwise, keep going along with me. So, looking at this line, I can see that this point right here is going perfectly through a corner. This point at the origin is going perfectly through. And then this last point over on the edge. So we've got those 3 points again. I'm going to pick 2 of those points and I'm going to find my rise and my run. So this time my rise, I'm going up 1. And my run, I'm going over 6. So I've got a positive 1 for my rise and 6 for my run. So writing that as a fraction, rise over run is 1 over 6. And that leaves my equation, y equals 1/6 x. All right, so we know how to find a positive, a negative, or a 0 slope, and we know how to find our slope from a graph, and then take that slope and write an equation to represent our function. That was a lot of work today. Nice job. I will see you next time. Bye, guys.